Good morning and welcome to the second Meet a Mentor panel of GrayHat. We're super pleased to be here. Last night we had an incident response panel, and that was amazing. And now today we're going to go a little bit deeper on the technical side into SIEMs and log analysis. So you're probably wondering, if you're just tuning in, what on earth Meet a Mentor even means. So over DEF CON Safe Mode this year, Blue Team Village created a program called Meet a Mentor, where essentially we take input from interested people, match mentors to mentees, and we also run monthly meetups that consist of panel discussions with our various mentors. So this year we decided to expand that out a little bit and include a couple of these for GrayHat. So we're joined today by some of our mentors in the program. And we're going to talk about topics of interest as voted by our community participants. The Meet a Mentor program is now closed, but we're hoping to be able to expand it in the next year or so. So please feel free to get in touch with Blue Team Village for more information. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. You might notice some of us are slightly dressed up because it's Halloween. Happy Halloween, everyone, if you actually celebrate it. And if you don't celebrate Halloween, I certainly hope that you celebrate the day after Halloween, which is get clearance candy from your local pharmacy. So with no further ado, I'm going to call on each of the panelists and have them introduce themselves. I'm going to start with O'Shea. You're muted.
Great way to kick it off. Awesome. Yeah, O'Shea Bowens, located in Boston, Massachusetts, or Sir Mudblood on Twitter, and then a bunch of other handles in different IRC channels. Yeah, Cyber Defender, here to have some fun.
Cool, thank you. Skye.
Hey, yeah, it's Echo by Skye. David Dias. I am coming up on over 5 years as a SOC analyst, various different types of organizations, mostly ISP level. But yeah, excited.
Great. And then next, we have two Chris's, so I'm going to call Chris Maenner.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Maenner. I'm Director of Cloud Infrastructure and Security at a startup called GoPuff. GoPuff is a delivery supply chain that we're able to deliver pretty much any kind of convenience product in the United States currently. And a lot of my focus is building and developing any kind of cloud infrastructure as well as the security components to protect GoPuff as well as our customers.
Great. And then last but not least, I'm going to call on Chris Lynch.
Hi, I'm Chris Lynch. I'm currently a senior Splunk engineer with CrowdStrike. I've been doing security and analysis for about 13 years now.
Cool. Very cool. And I always forget to introduce myself, so I will do that. I am Cassandra, aka Muteki. I'm actually an Azure/O365 sysadmin, so I do a lot with logging in that very specific space. And I'm also one of the leads for the Blue Team Village's Meet a Mentor program and a Blue Team Village organizer. So with that, I'm going to jump right into the questions, and we're going to kind of break this up into a couple of different components. So as you might have guessed from the title, we're going to talk about getting in, and then we're going to talk about getting good. And then towards the end, we'll also talk about some more technical aspects of SIEMs and logging. So for the first question, I'm going to call on Skye. And then the question is basically, what's your background and how did you get into your current position? Skye, are you with us? Is she frozen or is it just me?
Yeah, I think she froze up. I can kick it off if you need me to.
Go for it.
All right, great. So how I got into my current position and my past positions, I started in an audit role as a system admin, kind of like looking at how to protect missile defense systems as well as corporate systems. Eventually, I rolled into our startup to kind of like build out and protect our environment as well as just get the startup going. I was like low 10th engineer, and we've built a team up to close to 200 engineers since. And because of that, we need to kind of like really grow our security and development organization. That's why we kind of wanted to help out the blue team meet the mentor, because I'm seeing that as we develop in the cloud, we have really good talent in the security world, and we need to help move that stack up into any Azure, Google Cloud, AWS, so we can build out all that good security talent and bake it into the future of how we're going to be protecting any kind of applications in the cloud.
Cool, thank you.
No
Skye,
problem.
welcome back. I think
Hey, sorry about that.
so the question was just telling us about your background and how you got into your current position, if you'd like to take that.
Sure. So I actually came over from call centers. I went from billing, literally, can I help you with your bill, all the way up to abuse socks for 2 of the major ISPs. I think I worked for all but one at this point. And from there, I chose to go through the slightly more rigorous and painful path of doing the abuse SOC teamwork versus going into enterprise engineering, which is the other thing I was interested in at the time. It's paid off. I love it. It's a crazy, crazy world to see defense from the scale of the customers to an ISP. That's how I broke into it and broke my teeth on logs at that level, hunting and defending. So you might think that no one's out there protecting your internet service, but there's a lot of really underpaid, very sad and stressed people doing that work. And from there, I got into more traditional work as a contractor, and then eventually made my way over to a nonprofit as their only SOC analyst. And that's the work I do right now, which is awesome.
Cool, thank you. O'Shea or Chris Lynch, would you like to talk about your background a little bit too?
Sure. So for me, I've been in security close to 11 years. It's always been on the defensive side. I started out pretty much doing networking, actually. I was in Dallas, Texas, born and raised in Dallas, Texas. I'm in Boston now. But at the time when I left school to work for a startup. I was doing like sysadmin networking stuff. When the startup was sold off, I did that for like maybe another like year. I always wanted to get a role in security, but it was just really hard around 2007, 2008. At least in Dallas, it was. There weren't that many like entry-level security gigs. So I went into a security analyst role. From there, began to transition from security analyst work to like incident response work to CTI to threat hunting. And then at that point, I kind of realized I was like, maybe I should just start something on my own. So I started GrayHat security. But purely moving from like analytics, from like intrusion detection, from like literally PCAP carving, curious about malware, begin to learn a little bit on systems and forensics, curious about intel, learn intel, and then I guess moved into hunting. So it's a combination of all those areas where I spend a decent amount of my time.
Cool, thank you. And Chris Lynch, did you want to contribute as well?
Sure. I started off as a attacker doing pen testing, and then I kind of got tired of that and started moving into defensive technologies. And I started off, I was at G's Security Center, and I didn't like how any of our tools worked, so I started working on the tools and kind of haven't stopped.
Very cool. I'll throw in a little bit as well. So I actually started by doing help desk and AV support, which made me realize that I really hate AV, which everyone else does, I think. And went into desktop support, and I'm now in a system administrator role. And my exposure to SIEMs and logging is essentially what I've gotten to work with as a systems administrator. So instead of coming at it from a security perspective, I'm coming at it from a very functional operational perspective. So that's been really interesting. All right, so my next question is, what makes you particularly interested in this in SIEMs and logging? I'm going to throw that one at Chris Maenner.
Sure. I've always that's how I got my chops developing. I was, I'm not a traditional developer from the beginning, but that's what really got me learning how to build like little Python scripts or Bash scripts to figure out how to do ETL, to take a lot of this. At the time, there wasn't a lot of really standardization on log standards bringing into SIEMs. After that, I figured working on like older SIEMs, like I used ArcSight at one point, and that was always a nightmare to manage from an admin perspective. But I then was able to really focus on building out those use cases so that I could kind of protect and offshoot hiring or bringing in security people that couldn't develop and developers that just didn't want to do SIEM, and automate a lot of that into my workload. So I could kind of like have my own like little robot protecting my infrastructure, and then I could focus on higher priority use cases for not only SIEM, but other web application practices.
Very cool. And if anyone else wants to jump in on that, feel free.
Sure. I think the short answer is really, it was really learning how attacks worked. When I was doing networking, I wasn't a part of security. I kind of was on the scene. I knew what was like kind of happening in the background from different like forums and IRC channels and like people I hung out with, but I had never seen it at a large scale when I was doing networking for like a telecom. I was like a telecom in Dallas, pretty big one, starts with an A. So, but when we had to pass things off to security, and I was like, what the heck are they doing? I was like, man, I probably could do that. I was like, I need to find a way to get in, because there were so many times we'd have, whether it was degradation for like a business or just like weird VoIP issues. At the time, VoIP was being rolled out, and a lot of the issues that we were troubleshooting security. So it was like, toss it over and let them take a look. And I was like, man, I could probably do this if I just knew what they were doing. So that like drove or strengthened like the resolve for like trying to move into more InfoSec roles.
Yeah. And on the topic of moving into InfoSec roles, some of the questions that we got are about transitioning into InfoSec or into roles that deal more closely with SIEMs and logging from other InfoSec positions. So one of the questions I got submitted was someone who says, I'm currently in a vulnerability management role and I want to transition to be a SOC analyst. What should I develop in terms of knowledge if I don't have SOC experience? Particularly any skills or tools that would stand out on a resume or LinkedIn. So what kinds of skills do you think really are crucial to a role that would heavily use SIEMs and logging? That's open to anyone.
I'd say the biggest one is being able to quickly identify a false positive versus an actual threat. Most of the work I did is that 5-minute triage, and that is critical. There is so much out there that looks suspicious but isn't anything important. And the way I recommend is set up your own home SIEM. Do it on your home network. There's so much out there. Just throw a public-facing IP and just welcome the world into a SIEM. You will get threats. You will get a lot of attacks. But that's really a great way. I can say being on the hiring side of things for analysts, even if I see someone who hasn't had traditional SOC experience, if they're passionate and interested about security and they're familiar enough with at least like the open source tools and the ones you can put on your home network, that's typically enough for those entry level roles into a SOC. My only caveat is anybody getting into InfoSec, especially SOC, the hours will not be pleasant. That is the one thing that I always want to mention is don't expect to work a 9 to 5. I hate them, so that's not for me. Overnight, swing shift, those are going to be the shifts that you hit before going to normal hours.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Anyone else have other advice?
Yeah, just to expand on that a little bit. As on the hiring side, I do look for the curiosity of just, have you played with some of the tools, and not looking for experts, just have you at least heard of them, or have you opened up a PCAP and just poked at it? Don't necessarily need to know everything about it, but that curiosity of wanting to dive in and take things apart and go through some of the I'm going to use a little air quotes, the more boring documentation of like, oh, what is, TCP/IP? How is it actually implemented? There's a lot of interesting stuff out there that gets used on the attacking side, and you don't really get to look into it until you see it. So just that curiosity bit.
Yeah. So actually, there's a related question. It's a little bit further down that I'll throw out there as well. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I'll make it simple. Like I think since they're already, if you're in that position for vulnerability assessments and vulnerability management, you're already in like a prime spot to transition over. But in simple terms, it's really taking the results from your analysis from scanning and then being able to interpret that into either signature detection or being able to analyze the signatures that are created. If you can move into one of those two areas, I think that's time. At that point, when you can do one or two of those, it's time to maybe switch over. Like, especially if you can prove it, you can sit down with the team. I say sit down with the team. Everyone always thinks you should talk to the manager. Like, talk to the team and show them that you can do it. They'll vouch for you, and you'll get in a heck of a lot faster.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point.
Shadowing is crazy important, and most SOCs will welcome it. There is sensitive information depending on the company you work for, but for the most part, they'll happily have someone else in your same company sit next to someone, watch what they do, and yeah, like you said, if you ask smart questions and you're passionate about it, they'll be like, yeah, that guy, that person, that sounds great.
Thank you.
Yeah, totally agree. I agree with everyone. I agree with everyone on that. That's how I got my start in incident response. I was vulnerability management. I was just doing scanning and just doing audit. And I went to the SOC analyst and was like, hey, check out this and how can I help? And they're like, you want a job? I was like, yes. And that's how it all started, really.
Nice. Very cool. Okay, so I actually have a related question. And this is, what are some good technical skills that cover both incident response and SIEMs and log analysis? And if there are any recommendations that you guys have for resources for the actual technical learning, we'd love to hear those. And this one, I'll just throw out there to anyone that wants to answer it.
Sure. I'll go ahead and start it off. One of the biggest ones I see in most SIEM tools is some form of regex, mainly PCRE compliant regex. And for resources, there's a website, it's regex like 101, and it has a visual breakdown of what the regex is doing, including the capture groups and all the more complicated things, and it has a little reference guide. That's definitely something you're going to see in most tools, even if you're doing log analysis or incident response, even on a single PC, because grep and set and awk all take regexes. So.
Yeah, very cool. Anyone else?
Yeah, to compliment Chris Lynch, besides just doing the regex piece of it, if you want to, like, if you're a little bit, green when it comes to that piece of it, I found that joining a lot of streaming services, like I used Pluralsight heavily at the beginning, and they have a lot of really good tracks. And what I mean by that is, like, inside of their service, if you don't know where to start, they have like a really good security track, or they have a really good development track. And inside of there, even if you don't want to learn the details of development or details of the tools, it will show you steps on how to start, and then you can pick and choose what to dive into. So this will help you guide from a professional perspective without having to have a lot of the technical chops.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I would say two things, and I try to keep things like hella simple, but networking and some level of system administration or system architecture, like understanding one of those two, it pretty much positions you to be able to float between, if we're thinking about it from an InfoSec world or professional setting, you can float between IR, you can float between threat hunting, you can float between security analytical work. Like having either one of those at its core is insanely valuable. like 2 books that I have that I still kind of refer to. It's pretty much a series for Hack and Expose. Like, even though don't pay attention to the title, a lot of the stuff in the Hack and Expose series is like super crazy valuable from a defensive perspective too, because if you can understand how they're leveraging or how they're crafting the attack, like that's immensely valuable in understanding how to actually build out countermeasures. So I think sometimes when we think about the defensive side of things, we think super broad, like how do we catch all these different types of attack? Just narrow it down to your environment, right? Like, don't think about the world. Think about your hole, right? Think about your foxhole. Think about the organization you're working for. How can you use what you see from, like, maybe even I'd say Hack and Expose and the Art of Exploration. Like, those two are like pretty good at looking at the basics of what you're going to run into from an attacker. You're going to run into some level of either greatly written malware, crappy written malware, and at some point they have to use the network to get in and out. Like that at its basic, if you understand those two, you can float around and you can probably begin to write your own ticket and begin to build up to different skill sets. And those are 2 great books that are they've like stood the test of time in my opinion.
Very cool. I'll have to check them out too. Yeah, one thing I'll actually add to this. So specifically thinking about logs, it's all well and good to be able to search logs, but it's also incredibly important to know what they actually mean. So as someone who works with Azure and O365 logs, there's essentially like a logging into a mailbox via most modern authentication is a 2-step process. And there's a level of logs that is the first authentication, and then there's a level of logs that is the actual exchange mailbox work. So if you don't understand that component of or if you don't understand what that infrastructure looks like, then it's really hard to learn how to actually read the logs and create meaningful alerts. So a lot of it is putting it in context.
I can't agree with you more on that. One of the things I do in my home lab and in my work environments would be hey, I want to know what X looks like in my SIEM, or do we even see it? And actually going through that process of triggering it intentionally, finding it, because I know the narrow time frame, so I can actually use that to see what it looks like, and then work from there to tune if I need to. You can do that at home. You don't need expertise. You can install something and do something and then capture that traffic, look at it, see what it actually looks like, and be able to know, okay, this isn't suspicious, this is suspicious, this is exactly what I need to look for. And that level of being able to determine this from that is critical in a SOC analyst, especially if you're in a team that has a very low time frame of when you need to actually get it resolved and contained. I think the strictest one I was on was 15 minutes to containment. And you have to have that quick gut response. I know exactly what this is. I know how to respond to this. I know how to contain this, and then move on to the next one. It's a really good skill to have.
Yeah. So actually, I'm going to switch a little bit into the getting good side of things. And for this question, I'll start with O'Shea. This one is, was there a specific case, incident, or project that made you realize you'd leveled up and gotten from good to great at what you were doing?
I don't know if anyone gets to great.
Okay, I will say everyone has imposter syndrome. Literally, everyone has imposter syndrome. And I asked this question last night, and no one put down for it. And I was like, I need you to dig deep, guys, because like you've got to like sing your own praises once in a while.
No, I mean, go ahead. I remember when I transitioned over to IR. Like, I remember when the beginning of that happened. Like, I was working for Department of Energy. I was working and in the unit there was one individual who was responsible for forensics, and I did this crazy freaking thing. I started asking him questions. Like, I just kept asking him questions, and at one point I was analyzing something, and instead of sending the binary over to him, I took some time to kind of like use what I had learned at home, and I began to kind of carve out the basics of like artifacts, like looking at like pulling out Windows API calls, and then looking at those Windows API calls, and then trying to determine like, hey, have I seen anything like this across any other cases over the last week or the last 2 weeks, right? But when I did that and I wrote up my report, I remember specifically one, it was much longer, but I'd read my report before I sent it to like the shift lead, but it was much longer, but it was much more detailed, right? And then the dude that was in like forensics, like came over and like said a couple of words, nothing like you're the best, but it was like, oh, cool. Like, it's like, it looks like you're like starting to use some of the things you're learning. And when I began to do that more and more, that's when I kind of, the IR part of like life kind of kicked in. I was like, all right, maybe I can do IR for, a few years, however long it may be, right? But I remember specifically being able to incorporate that into just like my basic analysis, and then that was like the kicker for me.
Very cool. Chris Maenner, did you want to contribute to that as well?
Sure. Yeah. Give me 1 second. What? Could you just repeat the question?
This one was there a specific case, incident, or project that made you realize you'd leveled up and gotten from good to great?
Got it. No, that's I know what you're talking about here. So, we started having some they call it malvertisement attacks that were happening. And if you don't know what malvertisement attacks are, it's kind of like when advertising feeds get corrupted or get intercepted by a third party of some sort. And we kept seeing this weird uptick on web application logs and as well as network logs. And it looked like our systems were being attacked, but it was just really just putting payloads in people's browsers to then spin up activity. We don't know exactly what it was kind of transmitting, but then when we broke down the payload, that's when I started to realize, I was like, oh my God, I don't know anything about JavaScript, like period. Like I had zero clue because I was like, so behind the scenes, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm badass. I know Python. I know how to do batch and do like any kind of like using SIEM tools. But then when the real attackers started coming at us at these really obscure, valid feeds, that then made me step up my game, and I started to really break down how JavaScript attacks were occurring. Because if you start looking at attack vectors, and it depends on what position, so it's dependent here. If you are in like a startup world, or if you're in a world where it's more web applications where your customers come through that area, how do you protect them? So that's when I started to really have to understand how JavaScript work, and working with real developers that build web apps and components and modules, and seeing how they were actually hiding these components within like iframes, or just being able to allow a specific API to only communicate with a specific module. That then made me start to realize, like, oh, we weren't under attack. It was an exploit being ran, but it was just the advertisers just trying to gain money. So then that started to make me think, oh, they're not trying to attack the human. They're just trying to gain more money on whatever advertising platform that they were trying to use and game the system. So now you started to say, like, all right, I come from like sometimes a military background or a big ISP, like a lot of the panelists. And I started to be like, take that hat off and start thinking about the consumer, and start thinking of just your mom and pop. Those are the people that are like the new threats, and it's not anything that they can prepare themselves for. So it's like, how do you highlight this at the SOC level so that you could build these rules into like a WAF, for example, or in I think it's called a RAST tool. I forget the term, what the acronym means, but like these are like little things that you can build into your web apps and feed that data into your SIEM to start analyzing web traffic and seeing how users are either gaming your website using tools or a manual attack. And then that will help you level up your game into the next level of SIEM SOC analyst.
Yeah, that's great. I've had cases like that too, where I originally got access to Splunk just because I was curious about it, and we weren't really doing anything with it in my previous job. And I poked around, and of course I had no idea I was doing anything.
Yeah.
I continued using it in my current environment. And at one point, like we had some incident where like messages were getting delayed. Like sometimes a server defers receipt of a message, so it kicks back a deferral, and then SMTP RFC basically has like a retry period, things like that. So we got some reports of that, And I was actually able to come up with a pretty janky bunch of Splunk syntax to prove that there was a certain average of how often this would happen, and that the incidents within the half hour or an hour were like way above normal. So it was pretty cool to be able to use that a little bit more of that of the Splunk food to basically show with actual data that this was an issue and not just like one user being loud. So that was definitely a moment for me where I was like, hey, I actually maybe kind of know what I'm doing a little bit. And yeah, that was pretty cool.
That's awesome to hear. Yes, Splunk's a great tool to really for beginners because it's very mature and it will have a lot of the basics done for you, so you can learn the syntax and it'll start teaching you to think outside the box when it comes to attack vectors.
Yeah, it's also good for statistics.
And there's so many people out there you can ask. There's so many forums and Slack channels, and even I've seen like a couple IRC channels that are dedicated to like security individuals in Splunk. So like if you're stuck, there's a good chance there's some room or there's a Slack channel where you can drop some questions and someone will help you out.
So actually, that feeds absolutely perfectly into the next question I have, which I'm going to throw at Chris Lynch. This one is, what makes Splunk not a SIEM when it's one of the most widely used tools?
Yeah. So, as I said in my intro, I am a Splunk engineer. This is what I've been doing for a while. But while it's a very widely deployed tool, it's not a SIEM. It actually isn't a statistical system based on its technologies under the hood, because it's a single phase map reduce system. But that's going really technical into how it works. But at the end of the day, Splunk is not an event management system. It is a log parsing system and log storage system. So what kind of breaks it from, and at least my opinion, not being a SIEM, and I'm not including their add-ons where they kind of add the addition of event management into it, is the fact that you can't take a log or an alert from the system and then have a workflow attached to it, at least in the core. They do have add-ons that extend its capabilities, but they're just that add-ons. And the other problem, why I don't really consider it a SIEM, at least for most people, is price. Like, and I know this is kind of weird where we're crossing technical capabilities, but realistically, if you can't get it implemented because management's like, hey, this is too expensive, then it doesn't meet the criteria.
And
Yeah,
it
that
is
was really good.
very expensive. Nonprofit, I remember the amount that one of the ISPs I worked for spent on Splunk and just the security side of Splunk, and it is fun to make you lose all the blood in your face. But other than that, I'd say it's kind of like, I'd say the analogy on not Splunk is elk stock and say logarithm. Elk is logs and moving it to a centralized repository. Logarithm is the SIEM you use to interact with those logs and to onboard them. Splunk is very similar, but it also has capabilities you can add to it, thanks to a few acquisitions that are some nice SIEMs.
Cool.
And
So this actually moves us. Sorry, this actually moves us into the technical section. So I'll let whoever was going to add to that. But then the next question is actually, what SIEMs do you have experience, and what are the pros and cons? So sorry, whoever I interrupted, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, if you're at a really small scale, you can get a lot done with just the built-in syslog and log aggregations that are built into Windows and Linux, without needing any fancy applications. So that's all I was gonna add.
Cool. Yeah, and so what SIEMs do people have experience with? Or well, you can also throw some log tools in there.
More than not is
I mean,
on our list.
I've been at this for like 11 years, right? So like I think almost every major SIEM I've probably touched, like down from, I don't know, ArcSight to the Splunk SIEM, not Splunk as a SIEM, but the Splunk add-on for SIEM, or the purchase for the security product as a SIEM. What it's, I try not to get like too bogged down. Like I remember at one point, actually, I'll just say this. I remember at one point, it was maybe a couple years ago, I was looking at my resume and I had someone like, I paid someone to like review it, like a professional. And they were like, your tools, you have a section for tools and it's way too long. Like you don't need to like list out every single tool you work with. I was like, I disagree because there's like legit employers out there that want to know like every single tool you've worked with. And what I began to realize was there's only, I mean, I knew this kind of beforehand, but the way I summarized this, and I'm not trying to dodge the question, it's like the SIEMs are pretty much the same across the board. It's just the language they use, that structure for like how you search across their data. Like if you're going from like, I don't know, CrowdStrike to Cyberease, I'm not like advocating for either one. They're doing pretty much the same thing. It's just like the query language that's a little bit different, right? So like I think the thing to walk away with SIEMs in regards to like the like general knowledge isn't like, you know, how you search across it. It's like how are they collecting data and then how are they parsing it and how is it delivered to you? If you can start to answer like those questions across no matter what the tech is, whatever the tech stack is, I think that's a better way to approach it versus I need to use every single one of these SIEMs, because spoiler alert, a lot of those don't come with they're not freeware, right? You can't build, Carbon Black inside your home environment, right? Like you're not gonna be able to do that. You're not gonna be able to build ArcSight in your home environment unless you're just balling out of control. Like there's a lot of things you're not gonna be able to do in your spare time that you're almost like reliant upon the employer for. So I think understanding the basic functionality and how data is delivered to you from a job, from your job responsibility perspective is like a kind of a different approach to take.
Yes,
Yeah, and I'll add on to that as well. Besides all the older SIEMs that have been, I wouldn't say older, but a lot of the more mature SIEMs, I've worked, and I think a lot of people, and I think Skye highlighted this as well. Splunk is great, just basically parsing data. I found that Elastic is great, is really, really great because it's open source, it's cheap, you can test it at your home, you can spin it up on kubes. You don't even have to spin it up on kubes, you can just run it locally, so that you can prepare for a job. ArcSight was the de facto for many years, but I switched into using Azure Sentinel. That has been a game changer for me, only because it then offloaded me trying to hire staff because we can't. Finance won't approve it. So I was able to just build out, because it's all serverless. So you can kind of like send all your data into Azure. You can keep your log costs down because you can set TTLs baked into it. So that has been a newer SIEM that I've been very pleased with so far. I haven't tried like AWS Security Center. I don't know who Google's competitor is. I never looked into it. But I think that's a really good start for a lot of people because it's like you can get credits for free. If you have a not-for-profit, Skye was saying she works for not-for-profit, you can get not-for-profit status. Like Microsoft gives you $3,500 a year in credits. Like that could run your SIEM if you're not for profit for $3,500 a year. If you're really wise about data ingest, because it's all calculated on ingest of data, just like Splunk. So that's my 2 cents on just the tools I worked on.
Very cool.
Yeah. So the last thing I'm gonna add is I agree with being tool agnostic on it, and it's more important about your data. You'll get a lot more bang for your buck learning like, oh, hey, this is a Windows login event. What does it mean? And what are the pieces I care about? And starting to build, like, I have an entire bookmark folder just for like Windows events, and it's like, here's the events and subcategories, and this is the details of what that actually means. And I get a lot more use out of that than some per tool knowledge.
Share it.
I'd even add on to that is the main thing when I think of the SIEM is the ability to timestamp and have a log of what, as an analyst, you're doing. If you can get to the habit of not just throwing up a malware box and reading logs, but actually building out and writing out the report side of it, there's paperwork. That is such a useful skill. If you'd say that and you don't have any SOC experience or any security experience, but you have a cert or you have enough technical knowledge to pass the technical interview, and then you talk about, hey, I didn't just look at things. I looked at them, I built a case, I made sure I wrote out what the root cause is. This is what an analyst does. And that is, I think, a very, very important skill that gets overlooked by the tool side of things. When you say, hey, there's a SIEM, is just, can you, as you're doing research, can you write out exactly what you're doing, timestamp it, and have that report at the end of it to present or to know, hey, this is, wrap it with a bow on it, this is done.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I want to interrupt real quick. I totally agree with you on this one. If you do that, I will hire you. If you think, we will hire you. Like, that's the hardest job of a SOC analyst. So please go ahead. I didn't mean to jump in. I wanted to get that out there.
No. Skye brought up a really important point. Something I tell younger people that like I mentor is like, if there's any chance to like volunteer or help out with the architecture or like the deployment of something, like immediately jump. Like, you have no idea how valuable it is to have someone on the team that understands how SIEM, EDR, whatever the heck it is, was deployed. Because eventually, this is everybody, or maybe it's not everybody. I think it's like 90% of people in InfoSec. You're going to run into a situation where you're like, hey, where is that log? Or where is that source? And why is it not reporting? And then someone's going to say, what do we do? And the next question is usually one or two things. It's either I'll fix it or I'll ping someone on engineering, right? Like, if you understand how it was architected, like I do remember as an analyst, when I was like kind of leading other individuals, like that was one of the things that was required at a certain company, was you had to understand the architecture of like our tools before they would like bump you up to like a senior. It was one many things, but that was one of them. Before you could be bumped up to senior, you had to at least understand the basic architecture of the tool sets we were using. And I was like, that's maybe not that useful for me. But then I realized fairly quickly, once I saw the criteria they wanted me to learn, I was like, yeah, this is super important, actually. So anytime that happens, if there's like an architectural project in the SOC, like, raise your hand and volunteer for it. Stay late, suck it up. You're gonna, yeah, maybe it's extra hours, or maybe you have to come early, but it will pay off. Like, I promise you.
I can absolutely sign on and agree with that. Totally. The next question I have listed, I'm actually going to pick on. Let me go back to picking on Chris Maenner. What are the biggest challenges you face when working with multiple data sources?
Yes. So I'll tell you I'll tell you the biggest problem that we had at my previous job. We were streaming over 800,000 events per second on a Kafka cluster. So the reason why we did this is, going into the answer to this, is because of the bad data. It was horrible. And it's not horrible because it was bad developers or bad tool choice. It was just a lot of legacy. So if we had like a lot of modern tools that use like RFC standards, we would know what the data structure is. So it was really easy. You would throw like a log stash has this RFC filter that says look for like Windows events. It'll parse it really clean for you. But then we had a lot of these applications that we had a lot of turnover because of contractors or just, finance saying this is not needed anymore. And that developer moves on, but that application just lives on, and it's a critical system. So like, we would see a lot of the bad data. We would then tackle it from a prioritization. We would say, what's RFC standard and what fails? We'd throw a log stash in the middle of this, and if it passed the filtration system, it would just go into our SIEM. And anything that failed, it would alert, like on our Kibana. In this case, we were using Kibana at this point. We would then tackle piece by piece what the logs were, and then go back to the development team and either write a ticket to say fix this and make it these standards, or just give me JSON. I'll take that, because then if it's JSON, I can easily parse it. If that didn't exist, we would then have to go into the application and write little middleware applications to do that parsing. I found at the time, I thought this was a great idea, because it was like, oh, cool, we get to build ETLs, and this is going to be a really good learning experience. And then it grew and grew and grew and grew. And because of that, I was able to sell to the VPs and the directors to be like, all right, we have a 3-man team, not only doing use cases and doing alerting, but doing ETL. Let's contract all this and break up people that have experience with scripting, to give them the skills to up, to give them experience in SOC, and then at the same time backfill those new people that don't really have this experience, and go into what Skye was saying, people that think. Like, And when I mean by thinking, I don't mean to sound negative here, but it's sort of like come at a problem instead of boiling the ocean. Focus on what you can do and accomplish at the current state. It's a very I'm big into the Stoics now. It's a philosophy, right? And the Stoic state, focus on what you can do at the current state because you won't be able to tackle everything. Kind of like the political system in America or international war. You can't stop this stuff. But if you can just fix your community or what's in front of you, it will then help build out everyone around you, and you'll be able to grow a team. And going back to what I was saying, when we were up to 800,000 events per second, we had a 3-person team. I was able to build out to a 30-person team and give jobs to all of those people, give them skills, and then able to abstract out and then move on to another program. Because it's kind of like if you can build out a community and help them grow, you can then move on to bigger and bigger problems, to solving eventually the root cause of, an ETL problem in a big industry, or building out a security tool, or maybe even spinning out and doing a startup and doing your own thing. And then you'll be able to inspire and grow the younger generation to allow them to think, and then eventually be able to be the new tool builders or even new owners of new product lines.
I feel like that went from, multiple data source issues right into like core problems in the industry. And it's kind of interesting that they're completely connected. And what actually really tips me off with that is in the chat, someone's asking kind of like, what is architecture? And because it's so fundamental to kind of how systems are put together, like basically understanding the architecture and understanding like where your logs are coming from and how to format them, at the end of the day, if you're just the person at the end of it using syntax and having trouble connecting things, well, there's the root of the problem. And that comes down entirely to if you're the person building out a system, you have to sit back and think about what it should look like, how it can scale out, and how you can make things as clean, easy, and clear at the beginning instead of leaving it for someone else to struggle through at the end. So if anyone has
Yeah.
other comments on that, go ahead. Yeah, O'Shea.
Yeah. So I think I mentioned this. Like, so I started GrayHat, and something that's kind of been, I used to hate hearing threat hunting because like that's something that a lot of, depending on if you're a government or whatnot, but you've done this for a while, is really just proactive security, really. But something that's happened over the last like 4 or 5 years has been this need from CISOs, I'm guessing from Gartner, so thanks Gartner, I don't know, but Gartner has like pushed this idea like you have to have threat hunting inside of your environment, and to a certain degree, I agree with that. To a certain aspect, I agree with that. But what's happened, at least for me, the last like 3 years, is a lot of the consultancy work I come into is either they want to build out some type of like threat hunting entity within the org or threat hunting capability, or they want to incorporate either CTI with hunting and within the SOC. And one of the first questions I asked from the threat hunting perspective is like, cool, tell me about your logs. Like how are you collecting? What type of logs are you collecting? Are you tagging your data sources? When you tag in, what type of information are you pulling out of them? And I usually get like a really weird, like blank stare. So this is what I'll kind of harp on, and I'll try not to take up too much time, is when you begin to build out these programs, especially around more deeper technical challenges where you're trying to get to the meat of a problem, CTI and threat hunting, having adequate data sources that are specifically tagged and parsed with the relevant information is key. Because if you go in the reverse direction of this, you're essentially burning money. If you just turn on Windows event collection and you're pumping that into whether it's Splunk, Elk, Devo, whatever the hell you're using for a log correlator, and you're expecting to find some weirdness there, you're in for a world of like surprise and a world of hurt. You have to really sit down. Again, this is like focus on your own foxhole. Sit down and think about the problems that are relative to your environment. What actors are targeting your environment or your specific vector, understanding the type of tactics they may leverage from like either from a malware perspective or from a campaign perspective, and then think about how you could detect that. Then begin to kind of focus, ask the question on what type of logs you should collect. The idea of like throwing everything into a log correlator are pretty much dead. Like the companies that do that don't generally get very far, at least now, because CISOs have kind of gotten hip to the fact that, hey, I'm not going to give security an endless budget, to ingest the world. and with no return for it, right? Like, I mean, if you've noticed what's happened with a lot of upper management and security, at least I have over the last like 5 or 6 years, they're specifically building out metrics and OKRs around the security program, and just simply asking to collect, terabytes of data over a week and with nothing to show for it won't fly very long, or that CTO is going to be out of a job, honestly, one of the two, right? So you have to kind of be a lot more methodical with the way you're approaching your data collection, understanding the threat that is, again, relative to you, and then understanding your detection capabilities should essentially drive, or at least help drive, the data sources that you are collecting. So you have a targeted focus and not just grab a bunch of crap and hope and pray you catch a bad guy.
I want to
Yeah.
add into that is that most of us aren't lucky enough to, from an analyst perspective, have that kind of influence, but we can do fix at the source. So typically I will write a way to parse out a log in my SIEM, and then, hey, I see where this needs to be fixed, and I will put that ticket in with our application, our dev team, or the engineers who will actually fix what the root cause is. And you'll hear this, if you haven't already, hear this from all of us, is finding out the root cause and fixing it there will prevent you from so many headaches. That is the golden goose is, hey, I have a problem, whether that is I have all of these legacy tools and I have to have have logs from these into it because of compliance or for whatever reason, or hey, I just would like to protect our customers on our enterprise, just the little things, and from there, hey, all right, this log stream, this log stream, and this log stream, and going through that and taking it just that one little piece at a time will expose you to the architecture side, will expose you to the dev side, and let you build out those skills and level up your game. And then eventually you can do things like onboard Splunk, onboard a brand, help triage. I think I actually heard Devo for the first time in a long time, and I cringed inside. I was part of a rollout of that, and real time versus historical lookups. Oof. But I know multiple log sources. If you just want one, my pet peeve is time zones and timestamps. Please, 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 please have them all be organized and actually standardized, because if they're not, I'm like, I need hundreds of a second sometimes in time zones in timestamps in order to be able to parse exactly what happened when. And it is that important. It is that critical. I've come into tools and had looked at their log tools, feeling no wonder you can't troubleshoot your own applications. All of it, everything in your Kibana is based off of ingest time instead of actual. No wonder you can't find anything. Let's fix this. And then my logs will actually be relevant to me versus just, hey, if they're not going to fix that problem, I'm like, okay, spend the money, throw AI at it. I'm not going to touch that until you fix the source of the problem.
That's saying time zones. That's a huge pet peeve. God, just make everything UTC, for God's sake. Just make it UTC.
I'm not picky. Yes, I would love UTC. I just want it to be the same. Whatever it is, I want it to be the same. I don't want you to take off seconds. I want you to give me standardized timestamps. That is what I need, because that is what you need in order to determine order of operations, what happened when you're looking at it from a historical perspective. If you're lucky enough to get memory dumps and those kind of things, yay, AIR. But when you're talking about SOC analyst work, oh man, that timeline is core to every investigation that you do.
Yeah. So I'm going to move this over a little bit to more the interacting with the SIEM or log analysis side. So I'm going to direct the next question at Chris Maenner. And this one is, if you need to manually sort through log files, would you use Python or Bash?
Manually. Oh, geez. I would say it would have to be Python. Only because there's a lot of mature tools out there, libraries. So if you're a beginner, It will teach you how to import libraries, learn the pain of developers that also don't really maintain their code, and that will at least get the low-hanging fruit completed. Then if you do run into some libraries that do not have that capabilities, it's okay. The Python standard library has a really deep subset that's baked in that will really help you out. And they really focus on that kind of standardization for parsing data. That's what it really came about. But if you're looking for the future, Golang is where you want to go to. I don't mean to bash Python because I go to all the Python conferences every year. I try to. It's one of the best development communities out in the world. Totally diverse. No one judges you. Everyone's super helpful, and they have this week-long hackathon that you could just literally sit with all of like the tools that we're talking about, and you'll work with the contributors. So I would say Python is the winner here.
Very cool. I'm actually also a huge fan of Python. I use it a ton for all the work that I do. And I know earlier we talked about having things requesting data in JSON. Python has really easy libraries to quickly make various object types from ingesting stringified JSON. So it's hugely powerful. I mean, you can use it as a scripting language, but you can also use it as an object-oriented language, and I like that flexibility. But then again, we definitely have people who are diehard Bash fans, so it's definitely, if you're going to pick two languages to learn, those are definitely two great ones to know just for InfoSec in general. O'Shea, did you want to add to that, or?
No, I was gonna say I'd love for Chris to expand on like the use of Golang because like I'm like in this flux position where I have like a decent because I'm getting into data science, so like I only know like maybe 4 people out of all the people I know in InfoSec that focus on like the data science aspect of it. So like I'm like looking to go back to school for that. But something I have been hearing a lot more in the security community is like leverage Golang, and I haven't heard anybody say why. So I'd love to like hear your thoughts on it. I know this is like totally random question, but
all right, no, I'll tell you, I'm going to state I'm a noob when it comes to Golang, but here's why Golang is really powerful and really good for security researchers, is that you have strict standardization on TypeScript of your data. So when you build a module, it will always do the type checks for you, where Python doesn't do that. You have to program that in. It like you can overwrite variables. That's like one finding. Second is the power of it's a binary. From security, you're worried like, well, what's in the binary? It's okay. It's all, you can read the source code and just compile it yourself. It's very simple. And then why that's the next big thing is if you're especially going to AI or machine learning. Let's just talk machine learning before AI. The containerization of your components as well as all your applications fit beautifully within containers, and it's very low amount of processing power that's needed, so that when you build out a Golang application, you can just dump it into a container and just distribute it out to the world and then just tag it. So if you get into like more of a DevOps role, GitOps is where it's at here. So if you need to do like spin up like a local Docker Compose, for example, you could say like spin up Docker Compose Chris's AI data parser, right? And I want version 1. With that, you know that you are getting strict standards on your data so that you can focus on your machine learning modules instead of worrying about the data. With Python, if you don't have a mature developer, they might not think about this. Golang enforces that. This is why I'm pushing towards Golang when we're talking about these kind of systems. Breaking into the industry, also, Golang has a very mature stack when it comes to web applications. Python's good, but it's not the best for web applications. So that's another really good aspect here, because if you need to spin up a quick web application to do something, to pull in whatever, or interface with like a SOC analyst, for example, I'm in love with SOC analysts because they do the real hard work that we need to get done. So if you can give them that interface to pull the data back, this is another really good aspect of it. Also, let's take Golang off the plate. Let's talk systems that you cannot update all the time. Python is a winner here because a distribution. I ran into when I used to work on like military systems back in the day. We would have to use like really old school Red Hat versions, right? Golang wasn't existent at the time, but Python was. And going back into Bash and using setawk versus Python, a lot of modern applications, if you spin up a container, you'll have a modern standard Python library, like a 3.5 or 3.6, that has what Muteki was saying around good JSON parsing tools. So going back to answer, did I answer your question first? Because I just kind of really shifted topics all of a sudden with Golang.
No, yeah. Well, I'll definitely ping you about this a little later too. But yeah, that's a solid explanation. That's probably the most coherent that I've heard.
Good. And then
No, I learned something too.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. Muteki, I wanted to really back you on this. With a lot of like base OSs that are getting distributed in the world, everyone's going to find because setawk is where it's at, but it's hard. In a lot of more standard operating systems, you're getting Python 3 now. That gives
Thank
you
God.
thank God. And you have all those JSON parsers baked into standard library with very mature, it's doing those data checkers. I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank what it's called. I'm a little bit newer to that piece of it, but you're getting that low level information to standardize your data, so that you don't have to worry about a SOC analyst saying like, oh, I didn't get the right timestamp anymore, because all it is literally a properties field that says ISO standard X. That's it. You're good to go. So these are the kind of things that will be really helpful for the future of security developers or security engineers.
Cool. I actually want to throw in there. I'm slightly heckling in the chat about not wanting to mention PowerShell. But if you work with Windows, PowerShell has. Okay,
Hey.
if you used PowerShell 5 years ago, it probably sucked, but it's actually very good now. There's also PowerShell Core, which you can actually use on a Linux box. PowerShell also has really good JSON parsing. I've used it, obviously, in O365 Azure. You kind of need PowerShell. So it's definitely a very powerful tool. Alongside, it can be object oriented, and it's a bit weird about that, but it's definitely heavily used in my world.
Hell yeah. No, Muteki, you're right. I'm a hater of Microsoft. I mean, you're supposed to be, right? Quote unquote, in our world. You're supposed to hate Microsoft. Here's the problem with what Microsoft's doing to us now, is that they are the core contributors to Python. They are some core contributors to some major applications. And they hired, so let's talk Kubernetes. Google created Kubernetes, right? Microsoft took their core developers and is now building AKS, which is Azure Kubernetes Service. They're contributing to all of the world on this. And if you go to PyCon, you're going to meet the core contributors of Python who work at Microsoft now. So Microsoft is making a conscious effort to standardize the web and at the same time disrupt what a lot of these other companies have been trying to do for a long time. I hate to be a Microsoft fan. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I'm gonna divert the topic really quickly because I think we're going down a bit of a rabbit hole. But actually, I haven't heard from Chris Lynch in a little while, and I know that you've actually done some more of the DevOpsy, software-oriented, possibly data science side of things. So I just wanted to hear your perspective before I move us back to other topics.
Yeah, I was trying not to go in a rabbit hole here because I can go into a rant on how containers are and Golang and Python and all that. At the end of the day, it's really what other tools are being used in your environment. Because I work at a place that most of our core developers on my team are Golang, but the tools that I use for most of the data parsing are in Python. So it comes down to can I get the tools supported and all that. So really, which ones am I going to use is, do I want to maintain it, or is there going to be a team who maintains it for me?
Yeah, definitely a good perspective. A lot of this all comes down to like you create a system or you create a process or a script, and like if you leave, what happens to it? Which we can't invest too much time and energy in thinking about that. We have to move on to another career or another company position. But it is still something to think about. Okay, so I have a couple other like kind of techie sort of questions. The next one I'm going to direct at O'Shea, and this is what should be on a SOC dashboard. So, and ideas on how to create useful SOC dashboards. O'Shea. There you go.
Mute got me again. Yeah. So, all right, I'll try not to go crazy about this because so throughout my career I've had to like manage SOCs from like a manager, director position, and I've had higher ups essentially told me that I need to have XYZ on a dashboard in case someone walks in, and my question is always like, how does that help any of us? But what I will say internally, again, if you are beginning to incorporate deeper technical areas of security around like hunting, if you are, I see a good one, right? So this is like one that I always try to aim for, and this kind of lets me know the current stature of like the security team. If there is something on the dashboard that gives an outline of abnormal binaries executed in the environment over a period of time, that's something I like to see, right? So what the heck will that do for me? Essentially, that allows me to display for not only the team that's responsible for threat hunting or the team or the SOC, the people in the SOC. It allows anyone that has access to that specific dashboard to really begin to think about, okay, well, here's what's executing within our environment. So when we have an alert that triggers for some weird binary that only ran, especially if it ran for less than a minute or two, that's always a big identifier for me. It's like, okay, well, like if we see a binary that executes and it's not necessarily anything that's particularly normal, meaning like our IT shop did not give it to people, there is no record of that being downloaded massively across the environment. That's something I want to see, right? So that's something that's a bit more useful for me to understand. Larger DNS requests or fluctuations in DNS requests or other packet sizes associated with DNS protocols are something that I think are relevant to see within whatever tool you're using, but within the dashboard. I think something else that is, I think people are starting to move more towards this. I call it, I just say chain linking, but essentially chain linking Windows event logs, moving from like the 4,000 to 5,000 to 6,000 series, like understanding when something was executed, what process was stood up, if there was a child process split up, where that child process is links in regards to the parent process. That's a good way to identify someone kind of just like lurking around within your environment. I think the problem that people run into is when they look at Attack Miter, either due to the causation is either management or maybe a different direction the team's going to take. But when you begin to look at Attack Miter, you think, oh crap, this is a lot of stuff to try to like get down, which it really is, right? I think you have to get into the habit of thinking, okay, the detection here isn't one-sided or one source. It's multiple sources that you're going to likely need in order to like actually move to like a higher degree of fidelity. So creating dashboards that are relative to something that is, again, this is provable, but something that's provable to like the current status of security, but also outline abnormal or just like sketchy behavior. If anybody takes anything away from it, I would say look for creating some type of query or dashboard around binary execution that stands out. Like that's something that is immediately like, that's probably someone beginning to like either laterally move across your environment or they're about to exfil something at some given time period. So that's my rant and take away for that.
I'd want to add on to that. I feel like there's 3 dashboards that typically are in every SOC. One that you put up because the powers that be want to see certain things, like you mentioned. And then there's the one that, like you were talking about, that's the one that is for all the analysts to look at if you have, TV screens up, where you just want to kind of have that in the back of your head as you're working. And then there's the personal agent dashboards that you have on your individual screen, and that should be customized or customizable to each individual SOC person. I look for things in a different way than the person next to me because we have different backgrounds and we view data differently. That's a good thing. That shouldn't be, you shouldn't try to squash one SOC analyst's way of threat hunting into another's. Having those three, I think, really covers all of your bases because there's stuff that I find interesting that this is what I use to go down a tangent and find something new versus someone else. And then, like you mentioned, there are certain things per environment or even just standard across the board these days that you want to be aware of pretty much at all times. The only thing I would add to that one is if you don't have dedicated staff for email, making sure you have phishing alerts and blocked emails, quarantined emails, and clicks up there. I would say the bulk of the click containment work that I did was related to someone clicking on something, downloading an attachment, clicking through link that they shouldn't. That is the, hey, I need to see that, and I need to respond as quickly as my computer will let me. That is one of those things as an analyst. I'm like, I see a VIP list, and I see, hey, they clicked on a link that's an external, and it has a not so great rating. I want to look at that. I want to see that. Go into the computer, see exactly what happened, look at their DNS, and go down that route of triage.
Yeah, that's my life. That literally is like 20% of my job is figuring out who clicked phishing emails and what to do about it. Yeah, email is a huge attack surface. Like I cannot stress that enough. It's often overlooked. I find in a lot of these discussions. So yeah, thank you for saying
It's an
that.
exhausting job. Exhausting job. I literally just pay money to get rid of it. It's horrible. It's horrible.
One of many things that I do and have done.
Oh.
I don't hate it. Yeah, not my favorite.
We should talk then. I have a lot of work for you.
Awesome.
Great. That's what this panel is all about. We're connecting people. Everyone's learning from each other,
Yes.
or maybe just comparing
yeah.
war
Right.
stories.
I'd say on a tangent related to that, quick one, I promise. Reading email headers as a SOC analyst, it's so important. It is so important. Please know how to read email headers. If you know that and you say that in an interview and you can actually show you an email header and you can explain to me what happened, I would be so excited. Because like you said, triaging the phishing emails is not for the faint of heart, and knowing how that traffic works and being able to see that and quickly identify spoofed or, hey, this doesn't have the right DKIM, all of those little tiny things that make one email legitimate and one email you're just kind of not doing this right. That is a very important skill to have. I try every time I go into an organization, I try to train our help desk on phishing and email headers, so that way I don't have to do it every day. I only have to do it sometimes. And so that is one of the things that I highly recommend to learn.
Definitely underscore that. So the next question I have, I'm going to throw this one to O'Shea. With the shift to cloud, how are you handling AWS, Azure, and/or GCP logs? Because now we're going completely new territory.
Yeah. So this oddly kind of weirdly goes back to I think it was the second or third question in regard to like when did you think you became great, or when you transitioned. Last year I was working for a startup where I had to begin to incorporate AppSec into my knowledge bank and cloud, specifically AWS. And something that we did have Splunk, so I will give Splunk a lot of credit here. I give credit to Splunk anyway. I don't know why I said that. Like I hate them, but one of the things that I began to learn from a different perspective with AWS is the default log collection and sorting is kind of a mess. So what you really have to do is begin to identify logs that, again, relative to your foxhole, relative to your environment. For me, that was really taking a look at what was reduced from the API side of things, and also taking a look at access control lists or access control rules around our containers. So what I had to begin to think about was, how do I take these 3 new log sources, being specifically the API side of things, the API, and then some logs around the container aspect of it, and incorporate that into like what I know from like an IR or security analytics perspective. And the big thing that I learned is you can't, and this is just my opinion, but you can't solely rely on the output from like an AWS to really determine if something weird is really happening within your environment, right? To investigate, you're going to have to really get to a point where you can correlate whatever's coming out of AWS or GCP, whatever is coming out of there, compare that against other system logs, against maybe what your developers are up to, incorporating that with your threat intel, but more importantly, beginning to create baselines against the API calls for specific parts of your build or of the application. As a security practitioner, what I began to realize, and it didn't take me long to know what I didn't know, was I had no idea what was kind of normal from an authentication perspective with the API into our application. So I had no idea like what was kind of weird and what wasn't. So when I began to think about that, I said, okay, well, crap, I can take some of the logs from the API side of things, and I can begin to incorporate that into whatever we have from our proxy settings, but also what we have from like Cloudflare also, and really begin to kind of dig down into understand like, okay, this is how I want to build out alerting for this particular part of the build. This is how I want to build out alerting for this part of the build. But it was really taking time to understand what was produced from AWS and how to incorporate that elsewhere. I came into it with the mindset of AWS years ago was like, AWS is going to give you everything you need to really analyze problems from a security side of things. And that's just not to crap on AWS. I'm not doing that, but that's just not true. Like, you have to incorporate other log sources there. Maybe that's a bit derailed off of the question, but that was how I began to kind of think about, what do I need to do for security from an AWS perspective? I need to add other log sources there too.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And so my main area of interest is actually cloud security, and I've worked on that. And building like serverless microservices applications where you're primarily coupling together pieces via APIs, it can get really hard to track one event through an entire infrastructure like that for an application. So that's where you have to have familiarity with like really understand CloudTrail, CloudWatch, figure out where you're going to feed your logs. There's a lot of built-in tools that mostly depend on having all the data in the cloud. But realistically, a lot of organizations have a combination of like on-prem, cloud-based, possibly multi-cloud, things like that. So it can get really tough to like you have to understand a lot of different components and then really think about a way that you're going to pull all that together and be able to come up with a coherent story. So it's a huge challenge.
Yeah. And when you said multi-cloud is like the biggest problem, like we're going into, like our VP keeps saying, I want to go multi-cloud. I'm like, you don't know Kubernetes. Like, we don't have a staff to support this. What do you mean? Like, so now we open up that Pandora's box and abstract more complexity. And then how is an analyst or a system supposed to collect those logs and kind of like detect any kind of malicious intent or just misconfiguration, because these cloud vendors keep changing their APIs over and over and over again. It's like a rabbit hole of doom. It's a really good, it's a tough job. So yeah, I'm glad you said that.
Yeah. Chris Lynch, did you want to add anything? I don't know if you guys actually work with cloud logs too much.
Yeah, I definitely do. Like the gap analysis is definitely something that we have to do quite a bit of. And my favorite area to point out is your network flow. If you look at like, oh, hey, AWS, they have VPC flow, and then there's a big asterisk down there that says this may not work, as expected, and this isn't really a security log, and look the other way. So being able to know what's actually being generated by these different platforms versus, how much can you trust it, and am I going to have to add something at like, the OS level to get that extra fidelity to be able to say, hey, yes, this is where my traffic is going. And it's not where I wanted.
I will say, sorry, this isn't like a product thing, but something that I look at a lot, especially lately, is really the companies that are tackling like container security products and like how to actually analyze and correlate logs from your containers, right? And that's it's the Palo Altos, it's the Twistlocks, it's all that stuff, right? But that's where I think the future of like the cloud, from a security practitioner perspective, I think that's where kind of like the future of like monitoring and detection are going to sit. It's going to sit within either at the container level and at the automation tool side of things. So beginning to understand, hey, who can update images, who can declare dependencies within Docker and Kubernetes, who's actually doing things with Lambda, like beginning to look at those, and then the container side of things. And that's where, at least last year, I had this holy crap moment. I was like, oh my God, I got to learn like about like container security, because like you can't do cloud. I shouldn't say you can't. It's really difficult to like think about cloud security as a defender and how you actually protect and analyze and monitor if you don't understand what the heck's happening with your containers.
Yeah, that's so true. So we have about 10 minutes left. I'm actually going to, so I have like 2 more questions I want to get through. So this one I actually have this question. This is a question I came up with. I'm very proud of it. So I'm going to direct this first at Chris Lynch. And this one is, how can I use SIEM and log data to advocate for better security policies in my organization?
Oh, this is always a fun one for me, because a lot of the times that I get brought into a company to do an analysis of their systems, it's a lot of fighting with different teams to be like, oh, hey, we need your OS logs. Well, I don't want to turn on my OS logs because of resource constraints. So the best way I found to combat this is working with operations and being like, hey, if you help us get the logs from like your Cisco ASA devices, I can help you diagnose, this is the firewall rule that's blocking your traffic over here, or this is your ports that are flapping. And those are, for most SIEMs, writing the rules to do that type of statistical analysis is extremely simple. So given operations those tools, then all of a sudden they're like, oh, hey, what about this one? What about this other system? And they just start bringing you all this data. And all of a sudden, as security, you have a really good picture. And because operations are the ones who normally do, turn on stuff first, you get insight into the environment from the beginning. So that's normally how I combat it, is just team up with those teams and, give them some low-hanging fruit and let them run rampant with it.
I can't agree with you more on that. I'd say the bulk of what I do is inner team connections. My job is to make their job easier and more secure. And I think a lot of security people forget that the ease part, the accessibility portion of what we do. I want everyone to access any part of the system that they should have access to, and do that without it breaking. And I think that having that data and that visibility is so important. I say we have a hybrid cloud, multi-cloud environment where I work, and trying to get our application engineers to understand and our devs to understand, be like, hey, if you set these logs this way that I'm recommending, that I'm sending you all these docs on how to do, then you can actually troubleshoot this next outage and it be minutes instead of hours, or seconds instead of minutes. You can drastically reduce the time that you're responding to your incidents. And I sleep better at night because I know that I actually have the log data for my SIEM to alert me if I actually need to be up and responding to something at any one point in time. But that interconnection between the teams is so critical. If you're part of a small team, expect to invite yourself into people's meetings, invite yourself into people's planning. I'm in every PI planning sprints. I'm there. I'm available for them to ask me questions. I'm there to provide advice and to poke, be like, hey, why is that logging bit all the way there at the bottom that is a backlog and it shouldn't be? There to be helpful and prod. It's so important to have that relationship with the different teams.
Yeah, as someone who is actually an operations person, I cannot recommend that strongly enough. So we have a couple minutes left. O'Shea or Chris Maenner, did you want to add to this for just a few seconds before I move on to the next question?
I just say show interest in what's going on. Like, just don't. If you, I think that whatever everyone wants to do as best as they can. Everyone wants to progress. I'm giving everyone the benefit of the doubt. So you want to be better than you were yesterday. In the security space, it doesn't matter. I try to take the approach like it doesn't matter what you know now or how smart you actually think you are. It doesn't do you any good if you're not sharing it with anyone. You can be the smartest dude in the world, but the people that the average IQ individuals on a massive team are going to outwork you because they're doing it together, right? So no matter what role you're actually in, or especially or what goals you're aiming for, showing interest in what's going on around you can take you fairly far. If you're thinking about advancement, show interest.
Very cool.
Yeah,
So the last,
I'm not. I don't think I need to add anything. I echo everyone. So keep going.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. So we have like 5 minutes left. I'm going to do a quick round here just to close it out. So I want you each to give me like 3 open source tools that you would recommend people listening use for learning, practicing, and that may help for future employment. So I will start with Chris Maenner, actually.
Okay. Herp Suite, definitely. I would say, is Python considered open source project? I would say yes, maybe.
Yeah.
So I would say, yeah, that's a great tool. And God, what's the last one? I would say just focus on those 2 for right now. And maybe Nmap. That's always a winner. You never can go wrong with that. That will really teach you. Or no, you know what? This Wireshark. There you go. Third one. Add Wireshark in, because that really, yeah, I think those 3 will literally will get you a job instantly. Just understanding any of those 3. Yeah.
Nice. Chris Lynch.
Yeah, so our syslog is going to be one for collecting your data. Apache NiFi, it's a nice little ETL tool that has pretty much everything that you'll see in SIEMs, but broken down into modules, and it has a slick little interface. And kind of the last one is just going to be like some type of NFS or some type of. You're going to need a place to store a lot of data really quickly, because when you start collecting these logs, they add up quick. So somewhere to store all of this that expands easily.
Cool. Aaron, Skye.
I would say Shodan is one. It's just a great tool to see what's out there on the internet, as well as protecting your organization. I really love Rita is a great one for kind of more the advanced threat hunting and kind of seeing patterns versus just seeing alerts. And then my personal favorite, if you're just learning or even just protecting your home network, because it has so many modules, is pfSense. You can do a whole lot with it and learn the skills that you need versus just learning the tool itself.
Cool. And O'Shea.
Sure. There's one open source tool called Detect. It was written by these 2 dudes in the Netherlands. It's basically a tool that allows you to like build a JSON layer on top of Attack MITRE. So everyone's all crazy about Attack MITRE, but understanding how you can correlate log sources into the different techniques is super important that no one really talks about. So Detect is an open source tool that lets you do that. From an IR side, I still say IDA Pro. Even I'm not the best with it, but it helps me with understanding how attackers actually built the binaries and like what they're going to do. And Elastic SIEM, Elastic has like a SIEM out. I'm like pretty big on that. It's helping me with like machine learning, but also keeping in touch with like detection and building out alerting and monitoring. You can do all that inside of the Elastic SIEM.
Cool. Thank you. And I'll throw just a couple other notes out there. So the first is basically a lot of the bigger products have free trials. So it's always worth trying to see if you can get something for free for a while, just to kind of muck around, get your hands a little bit dirty. Azure, AWS, GCP all have some amount of free tier. I highly recommend exploring that and just doing as much as you can. With AWS specifically, you can actually do a ton for just a few bucks a month if you actually do want to go a little bit past
Yeah.
free tier. So highly recommend looking at all of those tools and just, yeah, and Splunk has a free trial too. It's one of the most widely used tools, even if it's not technically a SIEM on its own. But there's always some amount of entry you can do into it and just, set up a home network, throw some logs at it, trigger some events like Aaron mentioned earlier, and just explore and enjoy every bit of it. So that brings us to exactly time. Thank you to all of our awesome panelists for exploring this topic. And thanks to everyone out there for your great questions. I know there were probably a bunch that I didn't get to, but this was a absolutely packed panel. So that's it. Thank you very much, and happy Halloween.